It was past midnight when my stepfather kicked my door open. My shoulder popped out of its socket as I screamed, and my mother, she stood there frozen, watching. I'm Amanda, and this is the night that changed my life forever. I can still hear it, the sound of wood splitting under his boot, that sickening crack that echoed through the hallway of my apartment. It wasn't just the door that broke that night. Something inside me snapped too. In that moment, I knew the thin line I had been walking between fear and denial was gone. The clock on the wall glowed 12:15 a.m. Just minutes earlier, I had been half asleep on the couch, the single candle on a stale cupcake still melting into wax. It was supposed to be my 27th birthday. Quiet, lonely, but safe. I told myself I didn't care that my mom hadn't called, that I didn't mind celebrating alone. But when the pounding started and his voice thundered through the door, safety vanished like smoke.
"Open up, Amanda!"
His voice was slurred but sharp, every syllable sharpened by alcohol and rage. "You can't hide from me. You can't take her away." My whole body went cold. I pressed my back to the wall, phone shaking in my hand. I could hear him breathing heavily, like a bull before it charges. And then, just beneath his roar, I heard another sound, softer, quivering. My mother. She was standing right behind him. "Frank, please," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but I caught it. She sounded like a child begging not to be punished. My stomach twisted. She was here, with him. The door shuddered again, another violent kick, and before I could think, the lock gave way. The frame splintered, sending shards of wood across the floor. He stumbled inside, his massive figure filling the doorway, fists already clenched, eyes blazing. The smell of whiskey hit me like a second assault. I stumbled back, trying to find words, but none came. The room seemed to shrink, walls pressing in. His shadow swallowed me whole. "You think you're smarter than me?" he bellowed. "You think you can just run your life and shut me out?" He lunged forward, his hand grabbing my arm with such force that I felt something tear. I screamed, high and raw, but the sound only seemed to fuel him. He twisted, and with a sickening pop, my shoulder dislocated. A hot surge of pain shot through me, stealing my breath. I fell to my knees, clutching my useless arm. Through the blur of tears, I looked up and saw my mother. She stood in the doorway, eyes wide, hands shaking, frozen in place. Not running, not fighting, not even screaming, just watching. I wanted her to move, to help. To be the mother who once wrapped me in blankets when nightmares woke me up as a child. But she was a statue, carved from fear. I cried out her name. "Mom!" My voice cracked, desperate, pleading. She flinched, but didn't move. Frank's grip tightened. He yanked my hair, dragging me across the living room. The edge of the coffee table caught my hip, sending shockwaves through my body. The cupcake from earlier fell to the floor, smearing icing across the rug like blood. I tasted iron in my mouth. I scrambled with my good hand, reaching for my phone. My thumb hit the SOS shortcut, one small victory in the chaos. I didn't know if the signal went through. I didn't know if anyone was listening, but it was all I had. He towered over me, spitting words I barely processed, accusations, curses, fragments of control he thought he still had. My body shook with each syllable. My mother's silence screamed louder than he did. The minutes stretched, each one an eternity. My shoulder throbbed, my vision blurred, and I felt myself slipping. I thought, this is it. This is where it ends. But somewhere beneath the pain, beneath the fear, a thought sparked. If I survive this night, I will never be the same. I will not stay silent. That promise, fragile as it was, held me upright for a moment longer, enough to keep breathing. enough to keep fighting, even if only inside. When I look back, I don't just remember the violence. I remember the silence in my mother's eyes. I remember the way the city outside kept moving. Car horns, sirens in the distance, people living their ordinary lives, while mine was being shattered. That was the night everything broke. My body, my trust, my illusions of safety. And yet, as the door splintered and the darkness swallowed me, it was also the night a new fire was lit, a fire that would carry me through what came next. Because survival isn't clean, it's messy, bloody, and it starts in moments like these when you're broken on the floor, staring at someone you love who cannot save you, and somehow you still decide not to give up. This was my midnight knock, and it was only the beginning. When I think back, before everything changed, I don't start with fear. I start with the smell of cinnamon oatmeal on a winter morning, steam curling above chipped blue bowls. I start with my mother's voice humming softly, the kind of melody she never even realized she was singing. Back then, it was just the two of us, and for a long time that was enough. My father died when I was very young. The memories I have of him are like old photographs, faded at the edges, blurry around the middle. I remember his laugh, though. That part is clear. He had this laugh that could fill a room, this deep rumble that always made my tiny chest shake when he lifted me up high. But then one day he was gone, and the laugh went with him. The silence after was unbearable. My mother tried to mask it, but I could see her crying into her pillow at night when she thought I was asleep. Losing him left a hole we didn't know how to fill. My mother became everything. Provider, protector, nurse, teacher, cheerleader. She worked double shifts at a diner in Queens, coming home with her hair smelling like grease and her hands raw from washing dishes. But she always smiled at me, always saved a piece of pie, wrapped in foil, hidden in her purse. Those tiny gifts made me feel like the luckiest girl in New York. Winter was always the hardest. New York winters cut through you, the kind of cold that chews on your bones. But we made it feel like magic. She would tape the windows with plastic to keep the draft out, then stack blankets on the couch, and we'd curl up together with mugs of cocoa. We didn't have much, but we had warmth, and for me, that warmth was safety. I still remember one night, maybe I was 9. Snow was falling in heavy, lazy flakes outside. The radiator clanked like it was coughing itself to death. My mother and I sat with the lights low, the television humming softly in the background, some old black and white film flickering. I remember turning to her and whispering, "We're okay, right?" And she kissed my forehead and said, "Always." That word carried me for years. Back then, she was strong in my eyes, maybe not in muscle, but in spirit. She could carry the weight of the world in her grocery bags and still laugh with me while we walked home from the corner store. I admired her. She was my entire world, and I was hers. The bond we had was unshakable, or so I thought. New York itself was part of our story, too. The city was loud, messy, alive. Even when I was small, I felt like I belonged to it, like its heartbeat was somehow tied to mine. I remember walking down Broadway holding her hand, watching street performers and neon lights, feeling like anything was possible. Sure, the rent was always late, and the walls of our apartment were thin enough to hear every argument from the neighbors, but to me it was home. It was ours. We had our rituals, Friday nights, we ordered cheap pizza and spread the box across the couch cushions like it was a banquet. Saturdays, she cleaned, humming those same half-remembered tunes, and I'd dance with a mop just to make her laugh. Sundays, if she wasn't working, we took the subway to the park and shared pretzels from a vendor. These were the small things, but they stitched my childhood together like a quilt. Even in the hardest times, she found ways to make me feel safe. When the landlord banged on the door about overdue rent, she'd wink at me and whisper, "Don't worry, kiddo, we're tougher than him." When the lights went out because the bill was late, she lit candles and called it an adventure. I believed her. I needed to. Looking back now, I realize how much she carried on her shoulders, how exhausted she must have been. But at the time, all I saw was her strength. And because she was strong, I believed I could be too. That was the world before Frank, before his voice invaded our rooms, before his shadow stretched across our lives. Back then, nights were quiet, mornings were gentle, and my mother's laughter was real. Back then, I thought always really meant forever. I was 15 the first time I met Frank. He wasn't Frank the monster back then. He was just Frank, the man who showed up at our door with a neatly pressed shirt, a bunch of daisies, and a smile that looked like it had been practiced in the mirror 100 times. I still remember how the light in the hallway hit his face that evening. It was autumn in New York, one of those crisp nights where you can see your breath if you step outside. He carried himself with confidence, but not the arrogant kind, at least that's how it seemed. He held the flowers out to my mom as if he had been waiting for that exact moment his whole life. And the way my mom's cheeks flushed pink, I hadn't seen her blush in years. She looked beautiful, nervous even. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and laughed a little too loudly when she thanked him. I hadn't seen that laugh in so long, it startled me. For a second, I didn't recognize her. That sound, light, genuine, cut through the heaviness that had lived in our apartment since Dad died. Frank noticed me peeking from the living room doorway. He didn't ignore me. He walked right over, crouched a little to my eye level, and said, "And you must be Amanda." His voice was warm, practiced, almost rehearsed. He didn't reach out to touch me, which I appreciated. Instead, he handed me a small paper bag. Inside was a keychain shaped like the Statue of Liberty. He said, "Every strong New Yorker needs her own torch." It was cheesy, but I smiled anyway. Because what teenager doesn't want to feel seen? And at that time, I wanted so badly for my mom to be happy again. Frank slid into our lives quickly, but in a way that felt natural then. He had a steady job, an office position with benefits. He drove a decent car, nothing flashy but reliable. He had the kind of manners that made neighbors nod approvingly. When he pulled out a chair for my mom at dinner or stood up every time she left the table, I saw her sit a little straighter, as if someone had reminded her she was still worthy of that kind of care. At first, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe he was what my mom needed. I watched her come back to life in tiny ways. Lipstick on the counter again, jazz music on Saturday mornings, humming while she folded laundry. Frank gave her reasons to laugh, reasons to put on that red scarf she hadn't worn since my father's funeral. For me, it was complicated. I didn't hate him. I didn't trust him fully either. There was always this tiny knot in my stomach whenever he looked at me for too long, or when he insisted on knowing my weekend plans. He never crossed a line in those early days, but he carried this energy, like he was quietly taking inventory of everything. Still, how could I say that out loud? Mom seemed lighter. She had someone to share bills with, someone who drove her to work when it rained, someone who made spaghetti on Fridays so she didn't have to. I'd catch her humming to herself, spoon tapping the side of the saucepot, steam fogging up the kitchen windows. And every time she laughed, I swallowed my doubts. One night stands out. We went to a small Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place with candles and wine bottles and checkered tablecloths. Frank ordered for us, confident but polite, telling the waiter to bring the house special, 2 extra forks. When the food came, he twirled spaghetti onto my plate first, then my mom's, before serving himself. My mom looked at me across the table, eyes shining, as if to say, "See, we're okay now." I wanted to nod back. I wanted to believe her. And for a moment, surrounded by the clink of glasses and the smell of garlic bread, I almost did. It's strange looking back. The red flags weren't waving yet. They were folded neatly, tucked away in the corners of his charm. At 15, 16, even 17, I didn't have the language to call it control or manipulation or performance. All I knew was that my mom was smiling again, and I didn't want to be the one to snatch that away. Frank wasn't loud in those first years. He didn't slam doors or raise his voice. He showed up with flowers and keychains, with polite laughter and steady paychecks. He made my mom feel chosen. He made me feel like maybe we could be a normal family again. And so when people asked about him, I'd say, "Yeah, he's nice. He treats my mom well." But even as the words left my mouth, a part of me stayed watchful. I caught glimpses, the way his smile stiffened if my mom disagreed, the way his hand lingered too firmly on the small of her back, guiding her not just gently, but decisively. Subtle things. So subtle that if you blinked, you'd miss them. But I didn't blink. I was always watching. For a while, though, I let myself believe. I let myself exhale in the glow of his politeness, because after years of emptiness, even counterfeit light can feel like the sun. And that's how he charmed his way into our lives. Through small gifts, polished manners, and the promise of safety we both desperately wanted to believe in. I used to think monsters always showed their teeth, that they came with growls and fists and rage you could hear from down the block. But Frank's cruelty didn't start that way. His began with smiles, with words that sounded reasonable, with gestures that seemed, at first, like care. That was how the chains slipped over us. Quietly, one link at a time. It began with money. My mother had always kept her own account, a small savings she was proud of, the safety net she had built since my father died. But one evening, over dinner, Frank leaned back in his chair and said, almost casually, "It doesn't make sense for us to keep 2 accounts. We're family now. I'll handle the finances. You don't need to stress about it." His tone was light, but the way he stared at her across the table left no room for argument. I watched her hesitate, fork frozen midair, and then nod with a small smile. Relief flickered on her face, like maybe this was love, someone finally taking care of her. I wanted to scream, "Don't give it up, Mom. Don't you see what he's doing?" But I was young, and he had already trained me to doubt my own instincts. Every time I questioned him, he would grin and say, "Amanda, you worry too much. I'm just making things easier for your mother." And when I looked at her, she seemed grateful. So I swallowed the warning that burned in my throat. The changes kept coming, small, subtle, at first. He started commenting on the people she spent time with. "That friend of yours, she doesn't really respect our relationship. Always filling your head with nonsense." His words dripped with concern, but the undercurrent was sharp. Soon, invitations stopped arriving. Calls went unanswered. Her circle shrank until it was just him. Even the way she dressed shifted. My mother used to love color. Bright scarves, lipstick that glowed under city lights, the smell of her favorite perfume lingering in the apartment. But Frank didn't like that. He'd run a thumb across her lips and say, "This shade is too loud for a woman your age." Or he'd shake his head when she put on a red dress, muttering that it looked desperate. Slowly, the reds and pinks disappeared from her closet. She wore muted browns, grays, clothes that blended into the background, clothes that looked like silence. I noticed the light in her eyes dulling too. She laughed less. The sparkle that used to flicker when she told me stories from her own youth, it dimmed until it vanished. When we went out together, she always seemed tense, like she was waiting for him to call, waiting for his opinion on where we had been, who we had seen. And it wasn't just her. He tried to change me, too. He would comment on my habits, the books I read, the friends I kept. "You're too headstrong, Amanda. Men don't like women who question everything." Or, "You should spend more time at home, help your mother. Stop running around the city chasing nonsense." Every statement was framed as advice, but each one was a brick in the wall he was building around us. At night, I'd lie in bed replaying the conversations. I could hear the way he coded control with charm, and I could hear my own silence. That was the part that haunted me most, the way I stayed quiet while the walls closed in. I remember one Sunday afternoon, Mom had wanted to visit an old coworker who lived just across town. She stood by the door, purse in hand, scarf around her neck. For a moment, she looked like the woman I remembered, independent, ready to step into the city with her chin lifted high. But Frank stopped her. He leaned against the doorframe, smiling as though he were joking. "You don't really want to go out there today, do you? It's cold. Why don't we just stay in? I'll make tea." She hesitated, glanced at me, and then slowly put her purse down. That moment gutted me, because I saw the flash of longing in her eyes, the spark of rebellion, and then I saw it extinguished, just like that. It's terrifying. How quickly control can become normal. How easily abuse can hide in plain sight. From the outside, it might have looked like he was just being protective. Who would question a husband managing the bills, or suggesting a quieter wardrobe, or encouraging nights at home? But from the inside, it was suffocating. I felt it pressing against my chest every single day, the weight of choices being stolen one by one. And here's the cruelest part: he never raised his voice. Not then, not in the beginning. He didn't need to. His control was a whisper that turned into law. My mother obeyed, and I sat there, powerless, watching her world shrink until it was small enough to fit inside the palm of his hand. Those were the subtle chains, invisible but unbreakable. At least that's how it felt. And the worst part? By the time you realize you're bound, it's already too late. The lock has clicked shut, and the key is nowhere to be found. I still remember the day I saw it. A Tuesday evening, nothing special. I was sitting in my tiny apartment, laptop propped on the edge of the couch, waiting for my mother to answer the video call. The glow from the screen flickered against the walls, and for a moment, I felt almost like a teenager again, waiting for her face to appear, waiting for that comfort I used to know. When her camera finally came on, my breath caught. There she was, my mother, but not quite the woman I remembered. Her hair was pulled back too tightly, her smile stretched thin, like a mask that might crack if I looked too closely. And then my eyes landed on it, a darkened shadow around her right eye, faint but unmistakable. A bruise, turning yellow at the edges, bleeding into purple near the cheekbone. "Mom," I whispered, leaning toward the screen as if I could crawl through it. "What happened?" She laughed, the sound forced, brittle. "Oh, Amanda, don't worry, I slipped. The stairs are old, you know." She waved her hand like it was nothing, like it was just another clumsy accident, but her gaze darted quickly to the side, as if someone was standing just out of frame. And her voice, it wasn't steady, it trembled. I wanted to believe her, desperately. I wanted to accept the simple explanation and hang up relieved, but I couldn't. I saw the way her eyes flickered back to me, then away. I saw how carefully she kept her tone even, how she folded her hands in her lap like a child being watched. And that bruise? It wasn't the first mark I had noticed. Memories rushed back. The time she wore long sleeves in the middle of July, the scarf wrapped tight around her neck on a warm evening, the way she flinched when Frank reached for the car keys. All those little red flags I had tried to rationalize, telling myself maybe I was paranoid, maybe I was projecting. But now the truth was there on her face. I pressed, gently at first. "Mom, are you sure? That looks painful. Did he?" Her eyes widened, and she cut me off with a sharp shake of her head. "Amanda, no. Don't start. I told you, I fell. That's all." She tried to smile again, but it collapsed in seconds. I could see the fear pooling behind her eyes, like a secret begging to be kept. And in that moment, I felt two things at once: anger and heartbreak. Anger at Frank, at the invisible leash he had wrapped around her. Anger at how he had stolen her voice, her independence, her joy. But heartbreak, too. Because I knew my mother was still inside there, trapped, performing lines she didn't believe, just to keep herself safe for one more day. The silence between us grew heavy. I wanted to scream, to tell her I knew the truth, to beg her to leave. But I also knew the danger of saying too much while she was still under his roof. My words could backfire, echo in the wrong ears, and the bruise on her cheek would only be the beginning. So I swallowed my rage. Instead, I said softly, "I love you. Please call me if you need anything. Anything at all." She nodded, eyes glossy, then ended the call quicker than usual. The screen went black, leaving me staring at my own reflection, and that reflection looked broken. I was shaking, my chest tight, my fists balled as if I could punch through the glass and drag her to safety. But I couldn't. I was here, in my apartment. She was there, behind walls I couldn't reach. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. That bruise, blooming like an ugly flower across her skin. I kept replaying her words, the way she cut me off, the way she tried to convince me it was nothing. But you can't unsee the truth once it's right in front of you. And the truth was clear. The silent bruises told a story my mother wasn't allowed to say out loud. She was trapped. She was afraid. And I was helplessly watching from the outside, knowing something terrible was only a step away. I sat there, in the darkness of my room, whispering to myself, "She's not safe. And if she's not safe, neither am I." Because when abuse lives inside your family, the pain doesn't stay behind one door. It spreads. It leaks into every phone call, every thought, every heartbeat. That night, the bruise on her face became a bruise on my soul. I remember the night I decided to stop waiting. I couldn't sit by the phone anymore, listening for my mother's voice, wondering if she was still alive or if he had finally gone too far. My apartment felt like a cage of silence, every tick of the clock hammering the same question into my head. What if I never see her again? That thought was the match. It lit the fire. I grabbed my laptop, pulled the blinds shut, and started typing. The words I typed into the search bar felt almost forbidden. Like saying them out loud would summon Frank into my living room. Domestic violence shelters, New York City. My fingers trembled. The screen filled with links, numbers, addresses, words like safe house, 24-hour hotline. Each one looked both like salvation and like a trap. What if he traced my searches? What if my mother couldn't even make it to the door without him knowing? Still, I copied them down, one by one, onto a small notepad I kept hidden under a stack of unpaid bills. The first hotline I dialed didn't pick up. I hung up before it even rang twice. afraid of the sound of my own voice saying the words. The second one answered. A calm woman spoke on the other end, her voice low and steady, like she had talked thousands of people off this ledge before. "You're safe right now?" she asked. My throat closed. I wanted to scream no, but all I managed was a whisper. "Yes, I'm safe. For now. But my mom isn't." We talked for almost an hour. I told her about Frank, about the bruises I saw on my mother's face, about the way he controlled everything. Money, friends, even the clothes she wore. She listened without rushing me. Then she explained the rules of escape. "Leaving is the most dangerous time," she said. "That's when abusers tighten their grip. You need a plan, not just courage. A plan." I wrote down every word. Hide a bag. Keep cash where he can't find it. Establish a signal for emergencies. Memorize at least one number in case he destroys the phone. When I hung up, my hands hurt from pressing the pen too hard. The paper was dented with my desperation. The next day, I met with my friend Maya, who worked in social services. We sat in a tiny coffee shop in Brooklyn, the kind where the hiss of the espresso machine covers your conversation. I leaned across the table and whispered like we were plotting a heist. In a way, we were. She told me stories of women she'd helped. Women who had slipped out in the middle of the night with nothing but their children and a backpack. Some made it, some went back. "It's never simple," she warned. "You can't drag her out. She has to choose it. But you can be the rope she grabs when she finally reaches for freedom." That night I packed a small bag for my mother. I filled it with basics, a toothbrush, socks, an old hoodie of mine that still smelled faintly of laundry detergent and not of him. I tucked 2 20s into the pocket just in case. I left the bag under my bed, ready for the call I hoped would come. I also built signals with my mom. It took courage even to suggest them. One afternoon, when Frank wasn't home, I managed to get her alone on the phone. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. "If you ever call me and ask about the red scarf, I'll know you're in danger. I'll send help." She hesitated. I could hear her breathing, could hear the fear crackling through the line. Then, softly, "Okay, the red scarf." That tiny agreement felt like a lifeline between us. But hope is fragile. Every time I thought I was prepared, fear rushed back in to smother it. What if he found the hotline numbers hidden under my bills? What if my mother never used the code word? Not because she was safe, but because she couldn't speak at all. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing scenarios like plays in my head. In each one, I tried to be the hero. In each one, Frank still won. Still, I kept searching. I found forums where survivors shared their stories. One woman wrote, "The day I left was the day I knew I might die, but staying was a slower death." I read that line over and over until it carved itself into me. Maybe that's what courage really is. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to act anyway. The planning became my secret life. By day, I was Amanda, the woman with a normal job smiling at coworkers, pretending everything was fine. By night, I was Amanda, the strategist, scribbling maps of escape routes, memorizing addresses, drilling myself on emergency scripts. Call 911, say your name, give the address, hang up if you have to. I whispered those lines like a prayer. There were moments of almost absurd detail. I practiced hiding my notepad inside a box of cereal, reasoning Frank would never dig through bran flakes. I bought a cheap prepaid phone and slipped it into the lining of my purse. Every small act of preparation felt like taking back an inch of power. And yet, every morning when I woke, the same heavy truth pressed down. The decision wasn't mine. It was hers. My mother had to want to leave. Until then, all I could do was be ready. Be the rope. Be the light at the end of the tunnel, even if the tunnel was still dark. I can't explain the mix of hope and terror that lived in me during those weeks. Hope, because I finally had tools, knowledge, allies. Terror, because I knew knowledge alone doesn't stop a fist. But I clung to that fragile thread, convincing myself that preparation meant survival, convincing myself that when the time came, I wouldn't freeze. Looking back, I see that those nights of planning were more than logistics. They were a declaration, a whispered rebellion. Each hotline number scribbled in my shaky handwriting was a promise to my mother and to myself. We will not let him own every part of us. We will find a way out. And with that thought, I folded the notepad shut, slid it back under the bills, and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would come, and with it, another day of pretending. But beneath the surface, a plan was growing, and for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something I had almost forgotten. Hope. I still remember the exact moment everything shifted. It wasn't during one of Frank's rages. It wasn't in the middle of the night. It was in the middle of the day, sunlight pouring through the blinds of my mother's living room. He had been rummaging through drawers looking for a bill or a receipt. At least that's what she told me later. And then his hand closed around something it was never meant to see daylight in that house. A folded brochure for a women's shelter in Brooklyn. The crinkle of paper was enough to ignite him. I wasn't there, but I could imagine it. The way his face flushed red, the vein that always bulged near his temple. When my phone rang that evening, the number didn't show up as Mom. It was an unknown landline. My stomach tightened before I even answered. Hello? My voice cracked. All I heard at first was quick breathing, then her whisper. Amanda. He found it. I froze in the middle of my tiny kitchen, phone pressed so hard to my ear it hurt. Mom? Found what? The brochure. He knows. He knows I was thinking about leaving. Her words tumbled out in a rush, broken by little gasps like she'd just run a marathon. I pressed my hand against the countertop to steady myself. Where are you? At Mrs. Klein's, across the hall. I told him I was taking the trash. I can't stay long. He's watching. Her whisper was so small, but the terror behind it roared louder than anything. I pictured her crouched in the hallway, clutching the phone like a lifeline, her eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. Listen to me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady even as my pulse raced. You're not safe there. You need to get out tonight. I can't. Amanda, he said if I ever tried to leave, he'd find me. He said he'd find you. My throat closed up. The threat had always been there, hanging like smoke in every room of that apartment. But hearing her repeat it, her voice trembling, made it more real than ever. Mom, you have to call the police. Right now. Her silence stretched. I could hear Mrs. Klein's grandfather clock ticking in the background. Then she whispered, I did. They said without evidence, there's nothing they can do. And that answer crushed me in a way I can't explain. It was the same wall we kept running into, the kind of wall that looks like justice on paper, but feels like a locked door in reality. Without bruises photographed, without neighbors brave enough to testify, the system shrugged. And she was left standing on the edge of danger with nowhere to go. I pressed the heel of my hand into my forehead, pacing across the cracked linoleum of my kitchen. Okay. Then we do this ourselves. I'll come get you. No, she hissed. If he sees you, he'll hurt you too. Amanda, promise me you won't come tonight. The line crackled, and I realized she was crying. She was trying to protect me, even in that moment when she was the one in immediate danger. Then at least stay with Mrs. Klein. Don't go back in. I can't. He'll drag me out. He's already pounding on the walls, calling my name. As her words broke, and I could picture his fists slamming against drywall, his voice echoing through the hall. I wanted to reach through the phone and pull her out of that place, wrap her in something indestructible. But all I had were words. Mom, remember the plan. The bag by the closet, the cab number I gave you. You have to use them. She let out a shuddering breath. I don't know if I can. You can. You've survived this long. You can take the step. The line went silent for a beat, except for her breathing. Then, in the faintest whisper, she said, "He's coming. I have to go." Mom, wait! The click on the other end was like a door slamming shut inside my chest. I stood in my kitchen, phone still to my ear, the dial tone droning like a flat line. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped it. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept staring at the phone, willing it to ring again, praying she'd call back. Every sound outside my window made me jump. A car horn, footsteps in the hallway, even the hum of the refrigerator, it all felt like a countdown, ticking towards something I couldn't stop. The brochure had been just a piece of paper, a single piece of paper that dared to suggest a way out. But in Frank's eyes, it was betrayal. And betrayal, in his world, was unforgivable. I lay on my couch, staring at the ceiling, heart hammering in my chest. I knew then that the clock was ticking louder than ever. Something was going to break, and when it did, it would be violent. And I was right. I turned 27 on a rainy night in New York. The kind of rain that doesn't fall in sheets, but lingers like mist, coating the windows with blurry beads that distort the city lights. I remember sitting by myself in my small apartment, staring at the single cupcake I had bought from the corner bakery. One candle. One wish I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. Birthdays are supposed to feel like milestones, like markers on a road you've been traveling. But that night, mine felt more like a warning sign. I told myself I didn't mind being alone. I told myself I was used to it. But the truth? I sat there waiting for a phone call that never came. I kept my cell phone face up on the table, screen lighting up every so often with messages from coworkers, a distant cousin, even an old college friend who still remembered the date. I typed polite replies, little hearts and thank yous. But each time my eyes drifted back to that dark space where my mother's name should have appeared. Every vibration that wasn't her felt like a letdown, heavier than the one before. The air inside my apartment felt thick, and the hum of the radiator didn't comfort me the way it usually did. I poured a glass of wine and sat on the couch, letting the sound of traffic seep through the walls. A siren somewhere far away, the rhythmic splash of cars on wet pavement, a horn that blared too long. City noises, ordinary and impersonal. They reminded me that life kept moving outside while I sat frozen inside my own little box, waiting for something that probably wouldn't come. I picked up the cupcake and held it in my hand. Chocolate frosting smeared slightly against the paper cup. I thought of birthdays past, when my dad was still alive, when my mom still laughed easily. I thought about how he would have made a big deal out of 27, probably joked about how I was inching toward 30. And I thought about how my mom used to fuss with candles, insisting on singing even when I begged her not to. Those memories felt like they belonged to another family, another lifetime, because the woman who used to sing over candles now lived with a man who had stolen her song, and me, her daughter, sat alone with silence and a sinking heart. I whispered into the room, almost like a prayer. "Call me, Mom. Just call me." My voice sounded small, like a child's, not a woman's. The phone stayed silent, so I started to write. That's something I've always done when the silence gets too loud. I opened my journal and scribbled down every thought I couldn't say out loud. I wrote about the loneliness, about how birthdays felt less like celebrations and more like reminders of distance. I wrote about fear, too. Fear that maybe she had given up hope. that maybe she was still trapped in his grip, unable or unwilling to reach out. At some point, I caught myself staring at the door. The wooden frame looked flimsy under the dim light. I thought about how easily he could break it, about how little protection it would give me if he ever came here. My skin prickled with unease, though the apartment was quiet. To drown it out, I turned on some music. Low, soft, a playlist of old songs I used to dance to in my bedroom as a teenager. The melodies filled the air. But even then, the loneliness pressed heavier. Like a second skin I couldn't peel off. Around 10 o'clock, my best friend called. She sang an off-key version of Happy Birthday, making me laugh despite myself. For a few minutes, I let the warmth of her voice carry me, let it feel like enough. But when we hung up, the silence returned sharper than before. By 11, I was curled under a blanket, the candle from the cupcake long blown out. The tiny wisp of smoke had vanished hours earlier, but the smell still clung faintly in the air. I couldn't stop replaying conversations with my mother in my head, the rushed ones, the coded words, the times she seemed like she wanted to say more but swallowed it back. I wondered if she sat in her own apartment that night, thinking of me, missing me, but unable to reach across the line that Frank had drawn around her life. As the minutes crept toward midnight, my eyes grew heavy, but my body wouldn't relax. I dozed off and startled awake with every creak in the building, every footstep in the hallway. Each sound carried the weight of possibility. What if it was him? What if tonight was the night the fragile distance shattered? When the clock blinked 12, officially marking the end of my birthday, I sat up again. I felt like I had crossed into something new, though nothing around me had changed. 27 didn't feel older. It felt lonelier and more dangerous. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, whispering once more, "Mom, please." But the night offered no answer, only the rain against the glass and the restless beating of my own heart. That was my birthday, a night that was supposed to be ordinary, but left me with a gnawing ache I couldn't name. A night filled with silence so loud it pressed into my bones. And though I didn't know it then, it was the calm before a storm that would shatter every illusion of safety I still held on to. It was past midnight when my stepfather kicked my door open. My shoulder popped out of its socket as I screamed, and my mother? She stood there, frozen, watching. I'm Amanda, and this is the night that changed my life forever. The sound was deafening, like a gunshot inside the tiny apartment. The frame split, shards of wood spraying across the floor. The air itself seemed to rip apart. I had been sitting on the edge of my bed trying to breathe through the tightness in my chest, and suddenly I was on the ground, one arm twisted beneath me, my phone skidding across the floorboards. Frank filled the doorway like a storm cloud, staggering forward, his face red, eyes wild, the stink of alcohol pouring off him in waves. He didn't walk. He lurched, driven by rage, each step a threat. Behind him, in the dim hallway light, my mother hovered like a ghost. Her lips trembled, her eyes wide and wet, but her feet refused to move. "Look at you," Frank snarled, his voice rough, words slurred. "Think you can hide? Think you can take her away from me?" His spit hit my cheek as he bent close. I tried to push myself back, scrambling across the floor like a trapped animal, but the pain in my shoulder was blinding. Every breath came jagged. The room tilted and I tasted iron. My mind screamed, "Move, move," but my body felt pinned by fear and agony. He grabbed a fistful of my hair and yanked me upright. My scalp burned, my vision blurred. The wallpaper behind him swam in and out of focus, the faded pattern distorted by the tears in my eyes. I clawed at his hand, but his grip only tightened. He swung me sideways, smashing me against the dresser. A photo frame shattered. glass raining onto the carpet. "Frank, stop!" My mother's voice finally broke the silence, thin and desperate, but it was like a whisper swallowed by thunder. She didn't step forward, she didn't grab his arm, she just stood, shaking, her hands clasped against her chest as if in prayer. The room seemed smaller, walls closing in. My ears rang with the echo of my own scream. His fist drove into my ribs, a dull explosion of pain that stole the air from my lungs. I gasped, my mouth open, but nothing came. The sickening crack told me something inside had given way. In that chaos, I saw my phone. It lay inches away, screen glowing faintly. Hope flickered. I forced my body down, stretching with my good arm, my nails scraping wood, Frank noticed. He slammed his boot onto my hand, crushing bone against the floor. The agony made me see white. Still, I twisted, hooked the phone with my fingertips and dragged it closer. He yanked me up again, shouting words that blurred together: traitor, liar, thief. His rage wasn't even coherent anymore, just noise wrapped around violence. I pressed the phone against my side, my thumb trembling. Through the haze, I found the SOS shortcut, one press. A faint vibration against my skin, my only lifeline he didn't see. His attention was on my face, on the tears I couldn't stop. "You think you're better than me?" His breath burned, sour with whiskey. "You think you can win?" His hand slammed my head back against the wall. Stars burst across my vision. I searched for my mother. She hadn't moved. She was crying now, but still rooted to the floor, her body rigid, as if chains held her there. For one insane moment, I wanted to scream at her, "Run! Do something!" But I couldn't make sound, only a rasp that barely left my throat. The room tilted again. My legs gave out. I collapsed, curling around the phone as if it were a shield. Frank's shadow fell over me, massive, unrelenting. He raised his hand, ready to strike again. And then, far away but real, I heard it. The faint wail of a siren. The sound cut through the fog in my head like light through smoke. My SOS had gone through. Help was coming. Frank heard it too. His eyes narrowed, rage mixing with panic. He kicked the dresser, splintering wood, then loomed over me one last time. "You'll regret this," he spat. I couldn't answer. My body was broken, my voice gone. But inside, something shifted. For the first time, I knew this wouldn't be hidden anymore. His violence had burst into the open. The sirens were proof. The last thing I remember was the flash of red and blue seeping through my cracked window. The sound growing louder, closer. My body finally gave in, the pain dragging me under like a tide. Darkness swept over me, but it wasn't silent. It carried the promise of rescue. That night carved itself into me, bone and memory, scar and truth. The door didn't just splinter. Something inside me did too. But in that breaking, a path was opening, one that would lead to survival, and eventually to something even stronger. When I opened my eyes, the world was white. Not the soft white of snowflakes outside my apartment window, but the sharp, sterile brightness of fluorescent bulbs burning down on me. For a second, I didn't know if I was alive or dead. My throat was dry, my body heavy, and the only sound I could register was the steady beeping of a monitor. It took everything in me to turn my head. The air smelled like antiseptic, too clean, too sharp, and it burned in my nose. My shoulder throbbed, with a pain so deep it felt like fire eating through my bones. My ribs ached every time I tried to breathe. I wanted to move, but I couldn't. I was pinned down by pain and by a weight of exhaustion that made my eyelids want to close again. Then I saw him. A shape slumped in the chair beside me, his head in his hands. Eric. His coat lay crumpled on the floor, his hair sticking up like he had pulled at it for hours. The sight of him cracked something inside me. This man, who had nothing to do with the nightmare I was born into, was still here, waiting. I tried to speak, but my lips were too dry. The sound that came out was closer to a rasp than a word. He looked up instantly, his eyes red-rimmed but wide with relief. "Amanda," he whispered, leaning closer. His hand found mine. It was warm, solid, real. For the first time since the chaos, I felt anchored to something that wasn't fear. "You're safe now," he said. His voice shook. I wanted to believe him. A nurse entered, soft-soled shoes squeaking against the linoleum. She adjusted the IV hanging by my bed, checked the monitor, asked Eric to step back so she could examine me. Her words blurred together, fractured shoulder, bruised ribs, possible concussion. It was too much and not enough all at once. My mind kept circling back to one thing. I survived. But survival didn't feel like victory. It felt like waking from a nightmare only to realize it was still clinging to your skin. Moments later, 2 officers entered. Their uniforms carried the smell of cold air and leather. One spoke gently, careful not to overwhelm me. He told me Frank had been arrested. Arrested. The word echoed in my head. After all these years of control, of fear, of threats behind closed doors, he was finally in handcuffs. I closed my eyes. The pain in my body was nothing compared to the storm of relief and dread fighting inside me. Relief that he couldn't touch me that night. Dread that this wasn't over, not really. Arrests are just beginnings, not endings. I turned back to Eric. He squeezed my hand, like he knew the war wasn't finished. "They've got him," he said, as if repeating it could make me believe. I searched the corners of the room, half expecting my mother to be there. She wasn't. Her absence was its own ache. I didn't know where she was, if she was safe, if she was still frozen the way she had been when the door crashed down. That image haunted me. Her eyes wide, her body paralyzed while I screamed. The officers asked me if I remembered what happened. My mind flared with fragments. The splintering door, the taste of blood in my mouth, the desperate press of my finger on the SOS button. I nodded. They didn't need the full story yet. My voice was too broken to carry it. When they left, Eric leaned close again. He brushed a strand of hair from my forehead and whispered, "You're stronger than you think." His words weren't meant to inspire, they were meant to steady me, to keep me from unraveling right there under the hospital lights. As the hours bled together, I floated in and out of sleep. Each time I woke, the beeping reassured me I was still here. Alive. Alive, when so much of me felt broken. My body hurt, but what gnawed at me more was the question circling in my chest. What comes next? Lying there, surrounded by machines and white walls, I realized survival was not the end of the story. It was the fragile bridge between what had happened and what would come. And as much as I wanted to close my eyes and forget, I knew the reckoning had only begun. I stared at the ceiling, light glaring too bright above me, and made myself a quiet promise. If I had endured this, if I had survived him, then I had to see it through. Not just for me, for my mother, for every moment of silence I had endured, for every bruise hidden under sleeves. The hospital lights were harsh, but they revealed something I hadn't seen clearly before. Survival is not weakness. It is the seed of strength. And though my body trembled, somewhere deep inside, a spark had ignited. I remember the room being too white, too sterile. The hospital walls pressed in on me like they were trying to keep every secret from spilling out. My shoulder was strapped, my ribs bandaged, and I could feel the dull throb in every breath I took. But none of that pain compared to the silence sitting between me and my mother. She was in the chair by the window, her hands twisting together in her lap, eyes fixed on the night outside as if the city lights might offer her forgiveness. For hours, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream at her, demand an explanation for why she had stood there, frozen, while Frank's fists landed on me. Another part of me, maybe the younger girl still living inside, just wanted her to look at me, to hold me, to tell me it was finally over. When she finally turned her head, her face was pale, and her voice cracked like a fragile shell. "Amanda," she whispered. "There's so much you don't know." I braced myself. She told me the story in fragments like she was peeling back layers of her own skin. She spoke about the early days when Frank's charm wasn't just an act, how he had swept in like a savior, how she believed he would be the anchor we both needed after my father's death. Then her voice dipped lower, heavy with shame. That first slap, that first bruise hidden under her blouse, the first night she learned what it meant to sleep with one eye open. I wanted to interrupt, to shout, "Why didn't you leave?" But I stayed quiet. Something in the way she trembled kept me rooted to the bed, listening. She told me how Frank stripped away her bank accounts, her friendships, even her voice. How he would remind her again and again that no one would believe her, that she was nothing without him, that if she ever tried to leave, he would come for me. That was the part that hollowed me out. All these years she had endured his fists, his rage, his constant control, because she thought staying kept me safer. "I thought," she whispered, tears streaking down her cheeks, "if he hurt me, he wouldn't hurt you. I thought absorbing it would keep it from you. I was wrong." Her confession shattered something inside me. For so long, I had carried anger toward her, anger for her silence, for her stillness. And now I saw that silence wasn't consent, it was survival. That stillness wasn't apathy, it was terror. I reached for her hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling like bird wings caught in a storm. "Mom," I said, my throat raw, "you don't have to protect me anymore. We protect each other now." She sobbed then, the kind of sob that came from years of swallowed screams, the kind that shook her shoulders and bent her forward, like she was finally breaking open. And in that sound, I realized something important. The violence hadn't just broken bones or skin. It had reshaped how we saw ourselves, how we lived. Trauma was a prison, and both of us had been locked inside. But in that hospital room, for the first time in years, she admitted the truth out loud. She named the monster. She said his name without flinching, and that act, small as it seemed, was rebellion. It was the beginning of freedom. I held her as best I could with my injured body, pressing my face into her shoulder, inhaling the faint scent of her familiar perfume under the sterile hospital air. "We'll get out of this," I whispered. "No more silence, no more hiding." That night, I understood that her fear had never been about weakness. It had been about love twisted into chains. And once she spoke her truth, those chains started to crack. For the first time, I saw her not as the woman who failed me, but as the woman who had been failed by the same man. We were not enemies on opposite sides of his violence. We were survivors, standing together, finally daring to imagine life beyond it. And that realization, raw and painful as it was, stitched something back together between us. Perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to believe that healing might be possible. The first time I walked into that courtroom, it felt less like a room and more like a stage. Every sound echoed too loud. Every pair of eyes seemed to follow me. My palms were sweating, though the air conditioning was turned up so high I could see goosebumps on my arms. I told myself to breathe, to hold my head up, to remember why I was there. But the truth is, I was terrified. Frank sat across the room, shackled but smirking, like this was just another game. His suit didn't fit right. His jaw still carried that cocky tilt I had grown to hate. He looked like he was daring me to speak, and when my eyes caught his, even for a second, I felt that same pressure in my chest I had felt on a night he broke through my door. My body remembered before my mind did. I clenched my fists in my lap, forcing myself not to look away this time. The judge's gavel came down, sharp as a gunshot. Court is in session. The prosecutor began with a measured voice, laying out the case like puzzle pieces being placed on the table one by one. The photographs of my injuries, the medical reports, the broken door frame, the emergency call log, it was all there, cold and factual. But what none of it could capture was the fear. The sound of my mother's silence. The weight of knowing no one was coming fast enough. That part would come from me. When they called my name, my knees almost buckled. I walked to the witness stand like I was crossing a minefield. Every step a negotiation with my own nerves. The bailiff swore me in. My voice cracked when I said I do. At first, the prosecutor asked me gentle questions. Where was I that night? What happened when I heard the banging? Did I recognize the man who entered my apartment? With each answer, I found a little more ground beneath my feet. I spoke in short, clear sentences. I described the sound of the wood splintering, the sickening pop in my shoulder, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. I didn't soften anything. I didn't make excuses. I wanted them to hear what terror sounded like. Then came the defense attorney. His suit was sharp, his smile sharper. He leaned on the podium like we were having a casual conversation. Miss Amanda, he began, dragging out my name as if it weighed too much. Isn't it true that you'd had disagreements with your stepfather before? That you had personal reasons to dislike him? The way he said it made me want to laugh and scream at the same time. Dislike? As if being beaten within an inch of your life was a petty grudge. But I kept my voice steady. I didn't dislike him, I said. I feared him. There's a difference. He tried to twist my words. He suggested maybe I had exaggerated the assault, that my mother and I had planned to make Frank look like a monster so we could cut him out. He asked if I was drinking that night, if maybe I had been emotional, unstable, prone to dramatics. Every question was a knife disguised as curiosity, but every time he tried to stab, I answered firmly, I wasn't unstable, I wasn't dramatic. I was alive because I managed to press a button on my phone before I blacked out. That's not hysteria. That's survival. When he finally stepped back, I could hear the faint scratching of pens from the jury box. They weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at me, listening. Then my mother took the stand. She was shaking so badly I thought she might collapse. Her voice came out thin at first, but as she described the years of control, the bruises, the threats whispered in the dark, something changed. Her spine straightened. Her words grew louder. She looked right at Frank when she said, "You broke me down for years, but you won't break me today." The defense tried to cut her off, to object, to reduce her to a frightened woman again. But the prosecutor stepped in, and the judge allowed her to continue. And in that moment, watching my mother speak with a courage she hadn't been allowed to show in over a decade, I felt something crack open in me, too. Not fear, not pain, power. The prosecutor closed with a simple line that still rings in my ears. Abuse survives in silence. Today, silence ends. When the jury filed out to deliberate, the room seemed to hold its breath. Minutes felt like hours. My stomach twisted, but I held my mother's hand. We sat together, waiting. And when the jury returned, their faces were unreadable. The foreperson stood. We find the defendant guilty on all counts. The words hit like thunder, and then like sunlight breaking through a storm. For the first time in years, I exhaled without fear chasing it. Frank's smirk disappeared, replaced by a slack jaw and eyes that darted around the room, looking for an escape he no longer had. I didn't cheer, I didn't cry. I just sat there, holding my mother's hand tighter, feeling the weight lift, inch by inch. Justice doesn't erase the scars. It doesn't undo the nights we lost. But in that moment, it gave us something we had been denied for so long. The truth, spoken aloud, backed by the law, undeniable. That was the showdown. Not fists against skin, not fear against silence. It was truth against denial, courage against cruelty. And for once, truth won. The courtroom was hushed when the judge finally lifted his eyes from the stack of papers. I could hear the scratch of his pen as he underlined something, the sound so sharp it cut right through the heavy air. My palms were slick against each other. I'd been waiting for this moment for years. Years of nightmares, of waking up at every sound outside my door, of doubting if justice would ever truly come. The judge cleared his throat. His voice carried steady and unshaken, the kind of voice that decides fates. Franklin Moore, for the crimes of aggravated assault, unlawful entry, and repeated domestic abuse, this court sentences you to 15 years in state prison. 15 years. Those two words seemed to echo across the wooden panels, bouncing off the walls, searing themselves into my chest. I felt the air leave my body in one long, trembling exhale. My shoulders, tense for what felt like a lifetime, finally dropped. For the first time in years, I wasn't holding myself against an invisible blow. I turned my head slightly, enough to see my mother. Her eyes welled, not with the frantic fear I had seen for so long, but with something softer, something like release. She clutched a tissue between her hands as if it were the only thing keeping her upright, but her gaze was steady. There was a crack in her armor, but through it, light was seeping in. Frank's reaction was as predictable as it was pitiful. He jerked against his chair, face red, muttering curses no one bothered to record. The bailiff stepped forward, hand on his shoulder, reminding him that his reign of terror ended the moment those words left the judge's mouth. Watching him shrink, restrained and powerless, was surreal. This was the man who once filled our home with thunder, who broke doors, bones, and spirits, and now he was just another criminal being led away in chains. I thought I'd feel triumph, some wild surge of victory. Instead, what washed over me was a deep, quiet relief. Like slipping out of a suffocating jacket I hadn't realized I was still wearing. My body shook, not from fear, but from the release of carrying a weight too heavy for too long. The gavel struck. Once. Twice. Each crack was a nail in the coffin of those years. My ears rang with it, not in a painful way, but in a cleansing one, like thunder after a storm. As the courtroom began to stir, lawyers gathering files, reporters whispering into their recorders, I stayed rooted to my seat. I wanted to memorize this feeling, to stitch it into my skin. This was the moment I had longed for, the moment I could finally exhale without checking over my shoulder. I looked at my mother again. She reached out her hand, tentative, almost shy, like she wasn't sure if I would take it. I did. Her fingers were cold, but steady. For years I had blamed her silence, her inaction. the way she stood frozen in the doorway while he rained blows down on me. But now, in this moment, I saw the truth. She was a victim too, trapped in chains that no one else could see. And today, with the word 15 hanging between us, we both broke free. When Frank was escorted out, he turned his head once, eyes burning holes into me. For the first time in my life, his stare didn't paralyze me. I didn't shrink, didn't avert my eyes. I met his gaze and held it. And in that silent exchange, I realized something profound. He no longer had power over me. His threats, his control, his cruelty, they were locked away with him. Outside the courthouse, the city hummed as if nothing monumental had just happened. Cars honked, people hurried, life moved on. But for me, everything had shifted. The air smelled different, crisper. The sky seemed wider. I hadn't just witnessed a sentence. I had witnessed the closing of a chapter that had nearly destroyed me. 15 years. It's not forever. It's not enough to erase scars, physical or otherwise. But it was enough to let me breathe. Enough to give me space to rebuild. To dream of nights without waking in panic. Enough to give my mother a chance to rediscover her voice, her spine, her laughter. As we walked down the courthouse steps together, cameras flashing from the corner, I whispered to myself, "It's over." The words felt strange on my tongue, but right, over, done. Not forgotten, never erased, but finally closed. And in that moment, for the first time in far too long, I felt something close to peace. When the courtroom doors finally closed behind me, and Frank was led away in handcuffs, I thought that chapter of my life had ended. I thought I could finally exhale, maybe even sleep through a night without waking in panic. But what no one tells you is that survival is just the beginning. You don't walk out of years of fear and violence and suddenly become whole. You carry it with you. It's in the way your body stiffens at sudden noises, in the way you scan a room for exits without realizing it, in the nightmares that come like uninvited guests. For a long time, I believed that healing meant erasing those scars. I wanted to wake up one day and be the version of myself that existed before Frank. That girl who laughed easily, who believed her home was safe, who trusted her mother's smile. But she was gone, and the harder I tried to resurrect her, the more broken I felt. So, I did what I had always done when the world stopped making sense. I read. I devoured every book I could find about trauma, psychology, the nervous system. I sat in the back of support groups, not brave enough yet to speak, but desperate to listen. Women, men, even teenagers, each story different, but all carrying the same invisible weight. I saw myself in them, and something shifted inside me. I wasn't alone. One night, after a particularly heavy group meeting, I found myself staring at my reflection in the subway window. The train screeched and rattled, but my eyes locked onto mine. I whispered, "You survived, but now you have to live." And that became a turning point. I enrolled in a graduate program in trauma counseling. Who said an R gives like ship? It was terrifying. I questioned myself constantly. Who am I to help anyone when I'm still healing? What if I fall apart mid-session? But every class I attended, every paper I wrote, stitched something back together in me. Learning the science behind my own nightmares, my flashbacks, my anxiety. It was like someone handed me a flashlight in a cave I'd been stumbling through for years. During internship, I sat across from a young woman who reminded me of myself at 22. She kept her arms wrapped tightly around her body, as if she could shield herself from the world. Her voice trembled as she said, "I don't know if I'll ever feel normal again." Without even thinking, I leaned forward and told her, normal isn't the goal. Healing is. And it doesn't mean going back. It means building something new from what you survived. The way her eyes softened, just slightly, told me I was exactly where I needed to be. After graduation, I made a choice that scared me more than anything. I opened my own center in New York City. I called it the Breakthrough Center. Not because healing is one single breakthrough moment, but because I wanted people to believe that breakthroughs are possible, even if they come slowly, piece by piece. The first time I unlocked the doors, the smell of fresh paint and new carpet filling the air, I felt my chest ache. For years, that same chest had been filled with dread, with suffocating silence. Now, it was filled with possibility. We had 2 rooms, one for group sessions and one small office for individual therapy. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Clients began to come. Women carrying bruises that hadn't yet faded, men who'd grown up in violent homes, still carrying that violence inside their bones. Mothers who didn't know how to explain to their children why they stayed too long. Every story carved into me. And every story healed me, too. Because each time someone sat across from me, I wasn't just their therapist. I was living proof that you can crawl out of hell and still create something beautiful. There were days it felt too heavy. I would leave sessions and sit in the stairwell crying quietly. But then I'd wipe my face, remind myself, if I can hold space for them, I can hold space for myself. My mother, too, began her own path. She attended therapy. She slowly relearned how to laugh, though sometimes the laughter cracked under the weight of guilt. We had hard conversations, ones that left us raw and trembling. She apologized over and over, but I told her the truth. I don't need you to apologize anymore. I need you to heal with me. And slowly, she did. Watching her reclaim her life gave me strength to keep reclaiming mine. Looking back, I don't see myself as the girl who was broken by her stepfather. I see myself as the woman who decided that brokenness could be used as bricks. And brick by brick, I built something. An identity, a career, a community. Healing doesn't mean I never feel fear. It doesn't mean Frank no longer haunts me in dreams. Healing means I learn to sit with the fear, to breathe through it, to teach others to do the same. Healing means my scars no longer whisper shame. They tell a story of survival, of courage, of transformation. And every time a client leaves my office a little lighter than they arrived, every time a survivor tells me, for the first time, I feel hope, I know I have turned the worst night of my life into the very thing that fuels my purpose. I am Amanda. I was once a victim. Then I was a survivor. Now I am a healer. And that is the story I choose to live every single day. I don't want to end the story with just the violence or the courtroom or even with the new beginning, because those things, as important as they are only pieces of a much bigger truth. And tonight, as I look straight into this camera, as I imagine you listening on the other side, I want to tell you the truth that saved me. Trauma changes you forever, but from those broken pieces, you can still build a life that's whole. When I close my eyes, I still hear the pounding on the door. I still feel the jolt in my shoulder, the snap that stole my breath. My body remembers even when I try to forget. That's the thing about trauma. It carves itself into you. It becomes part of your story whether you want it to or not. And for years I hated that. I thought it made me weak or ruined or unlovable. But slowly, painfully, I began to realize something else. Those scars, They are not chains. They are signposts. They point back to the places I survived, the nights I didn't think I'd make it, the mornings I woke up anyway. And the more I leaned into that, the more I stopped asking, why me? And started whispering, what now? I know some of you watching have asked yourself those same questions. Maybe you've hidden bruises under long sleeves. Maybe you've kept secrets to protect the very people who hurt you. Maybe you've lain awake at night, praying the footsteps in a hallway would pass your door. And maybe you've believed the lie that leaving is simple, that healing is instant, that justice erases the pain. I'm here to tell you, it's not simple, it's not instant, and no judge's sentence will wipe it away. But that doesn't mean you're doomed to live trapped in it forever. Healing is slow, it's messy. It's full of steps forward and stumbles back, but it's possible. If I can sit here today and speak to you, it means it's possible. I don't need you to admire me. I need you to understand this. Survivors don't need your judgment. We don't need your questions about why we didn't leave sooner or why we stayed at all. What we need is compassion. What we need is resources. What we need is community. Because isolation is the abuser's strongest weapon, and connection is the survivor's strongest shield. That's why I built the center here in New York. That's why I sit with women who tremble as they tell their stories for the first time. That's why I answer the phone at 2 a.m. when someone whispers, "I can't take it anymore." Because I know what it's like to think you're alone. And I know what it's like to realize you aren't. That moment, the moment you feel a hand reaching back for you, is the beginning of freedom. If you are in that place right now, listening to me, wondering if there's a way out, there is. It won't be easy, but you don't have to do it alone. Reach for help. Call someone. Tell someone. Whisper if you must. Shout if you can. Just don't stay silent. Silence is the soil where violence grows. And if you're someone on the outside, someone who loves a survivor, or someone who has never walked in those shoes but cares enough to listen, remember this. Your words matter. Don't ask, "Why didn't you leave?" Ask instead, "How can I help?" Don't say, "Just move on." Even say, "I'm here when you're ready." Don't measure their healing by your timeline. Sit with them in the mess, even when it's uncomfortable. That patience, that empathy, that willingness to see them not as broken, but as whole, that can change everything. I once believed that my stepfather had taken everything from me. My safety, my trust, my mother's laughter, even my own reflection in the mirror. But standing here now, I realize he never had that kind of power. Yes, he hurt me. Yes, he left marks on my body and shadows in my memory, but he did not define me. He does not get the final word on who I am. I do. And so do you. If you carry your own scars, visible or invisible, let me say this plainly. You are not just what was done to you. You are what you choose to do next. You are every breath you still take, every step you keep walking, every dream you refuse to surrender. That's strength. That's resilience. That's survival turned into power. So tonight, if my story stays with you, let it stay not as a tale of pain, but as a call to action. Share it with someone who needs to hear that survival is possible. Leave your own story in the comments if you feel ready, because your words might be the hand that someone else reaches for. Subscribe not just to this channel, but to this idea that healing is contagious, that compassion can spread, that silence can be broken, Because yes, trauma will change you forever. But change is not always destruction. Sometimes change is the birth of a new version of you, stronger, wiser, braver than you ever imagined. I am Amanda. This is my story. And it is not just about what was taken from me. It is about what I chose to build from the pieces. And if I can do it, so can you.